This call is now being recorded.
How's it going?
Good.
All right. I mean, I record all the calls. You never know. You might
I don't
say
mind.
something worth repeating.
Look, I mean, it's no big... Look, I don't mean anything personal. I think that you say a lot of things, but you don't bring sources for it.
Okay. So let's go one by one. So what are you responding to?
Well, just your whole idea of that a Gentile is obligated to keep the whole Torah is explicitly, I mean... All
right, so that's not exactly what I said. Okay, I mean, I said that if someone's come...
And the Torah is addressed to the Jewish people. I mean, it is. I mean, Yishma Yisrael.
Right, well, that also, I mean, the Rambam writes in Hilchos Malachim, and those who desire to convert. In other words, people who want to convert, not necessarily who convert some. If there's a conversion crisis, it's hard to believe that someone who takes Torah upon themselves, for sure, the Beis Din Gadol is not going to hold them liable for anything. But to say that God's going to be unhappy with someone that knows Torah is true and doesn't want to keep it, that's my point. That's my point. I never said that halakhically they're liable.
By the way, here's what I told actually a dayan that I use quite often on the Beis Din. So he told a few times some of the converts. He said, there was a convert that came to me and said that he just couldn't give up cheeseburgers. So he said, I think then you should just be you should just keep the 7 mitzvahs. And I said, first of all, I told him, I said, that's pretty sad. First of all, that somebody is giving up such a thing, because of cheeseburgers, and to think that he's not going to stand in judgment because of it. My Rosh Yeshiva always said, and anything that's permissible, he would say there's nothing in the world that's permissible. There's no such thing as reshus. He says either you're obligated to do something or you're not allowed to do something. That's the way you have to look at everything. Because if you look at the commentary on Pirkei Avos, where it says Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai Yisrael Yeshua, that Hashem is not, that the Mishnah is not talking to people that don't believe. It's talking to faithful Jewish people. In other words, all it's saying, because the commentaries say that the Pirkei Avos...
Sure, that's regarding first of all. I mean, that's not it. But you didn't even pair.
No, but Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai Yisrael Yeshua, why is it? What is it telling us? That even these things of Musar was given at Sinai. What does that mean? That means that we're obligated just like anything else. But what is it? But the only thing is, there are certain things, there are certain mitzvahs, and Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik goes on it in his book on Tshuva, and he says there are certain mitzvahs that it doesn't say explicitly, because for every person it's a different. In other words, it says that if things are going bad in your life, you should attribute it to Bittul Torah. Why? Because Bittul Torah is something that, you can't say that every single person should learn the same amount of Torah, because they're in different situations. Some people have to work more, but Hashem knows how much Torah you're supposed to learn, and that you're obligated to do. So in other words, for a Gentile, that just because he can't give up cheeseburgers, he's giving up the Torah, he's going to stand in judgment for it. But I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but you stand in judgment for everything you do. That's what it means, and people misunderstand this what Chazal tell us. He says, even a small whisper that one says between he and his wife at the time of intimacy, he's going to stand judgment for it. So a lot of people think, I'm not allowed to talk to my wife during intimacy. That's not true. You're allowed to talk to your wife during intimacy, but it says you can say...
I don't think there's a big disagreement here. Okay.
No, but it's just...
I'm always making a distinction. You're talking about the Beis Din Shomala. That's clearly differently than the Beis Din Hagadol. And I always make the distinction.
We stand in judgment for everything we do, whether it's permissible or not, because there's no such thing as permissible. In other words, if you have potential to grow and you don't grow to your full potential, you're going to stand in judgment for that. But that doesn't mean, that means a guy that has potential to be a Jew and to go to his full potential as a Jew and doesn't become Jewish is going to stand in judgment. There's no question about that. But
so it sounds like you're agreeing with me here.
I'm agreeing with you to that aspect, that in every person, in other words, even if every person in every situation of life, if you have a chance to talk to somebody about Hashem and you don't talk to them, you're going to stand in judgment for that. There are certain things that are not explicit. In other words, explicitly to say that he is explicitly obligated to keep Shabbos, of course not.
Yeah, what does obligation mean? Like you just said, that it has nothing to do with some earthly obligation. If someone knows something is true, he's going to stand judgment for that.
Yes, but not everyone has that ability. In other words, not everybody.
Oh, for sure. I never said that every Gentile has to keep Torah. I never said that. I said anyone who's convinced that Torah is true, it behooves you between you and God to keep that Torah. That's it. He's not breaking any halacha. The Beis Din HaGadol is not going to put him to death.
God is that judge. What I mean is that there's it's very complex people's situation in life. You know, if his reasoning is maybe he has good reason not to convert. You know, maybe his family is more important.
Right.
I don't know. It's a very complex, everybody's situation in life. The things that are not explicit in the Torah, we have to do the best we can to ascertain that.
Let me ask you a question. If a secular Jew finds it too difficult to, let's say, return to Torah because he loves cheeseburgers too much, well, what's really his excuse? Because we know that someone who doesn't know really the ins and outs of a prohibition is not liable for that prohibition. He doesn't know. I mean, he really has a din of a tinok shenishba. By you taking the time and showing him that this is beautiful, this is something that you should strive to keep, that is what makes him liable, right? I don't think anywhere.
Exactly.
So you're not for secular Jews coming back to Torah if they don't want to give them cheeseburgers, just like you're not for a Gentile.
By the way, a guy in your area, Yaron Ruve,
yeah.
His way is to tell people you're going to burn in hell if you don't keep.
Right, I'm not a fan of his teachings. Well, it's not his way. I mean, I'm not mad at him. I mean, he's teaching what everyone else teaches, so this is nothing new.
No, right? It's like such a shallow Judaism. Like you're doing everything because you're going to burn in hell. You know, it's like.
Look, the reason the Kiruv movement is really less than 120 years old is because people knew that someone who's Mechalel Shabbat, I mean, someone who didn't really believe in God, who happened to have a Jewish mother, is technically not Jewish. Yes, he's liable. Halachically, he's Jewish. That means if he lived in the land, the court would put him to death. It would behoove him to leave the land, but Chazal didn't think that this was a lost soul. No. They considered him just a Gentile, and in many cases worse than a Gentile. So just like they felt like reaching out to Gentiles, they would reach out to anyone, no matter your pedigree. But nowadays, this notion that you're obligated, no one's obligated necessarily to do anything, okay? Even a Frum Jew, a Frum Jew could leave tomorrow and never look back. It behooves us, it behooves everyone to come to Torah, if they know it's true. Now, the Torah is not just putting on tefillin and not mixing meat and dairy. The Torah, the bulk of it is ethical laws. Now, someone's not going to say that a Gentile shouldn't honor his parents or a Jew that shouldn't love his wife. There's no commandment for you to love your wife, by the way. You know that, right?
By the way, it says
there's no commandment to love your wife. You do it because it behooves you. There's a lot of things. Even the Ramban says that a woman who has no chiyuv to sit in a sukkah should strive to do it and should be proud to do it. Why? Because it's a zchut for her. Just like it's a zchut for any goy who knows the Torah to be true to keep it. It's quite simple. One has to be taught otherwise to think that it's a point.
Right, yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm pretty sure that a guy is obligated to keep anything that's logical. In other words, like
where does it say that? Where did it say that?
You know what? I haven't found the exact source, but I mean, I've heard.
There's no makor for that. There's no makor. There's a lot of things we do that we're not obligated to do. We do because it seems like the right idea. Kadoshim tiyu. I mean, anything could fall under that. If you're commanded to be holy, that means don't behave how the rabble behaves. See, this whole thing of obligation, what does that even mean? Okay, like people should do what they know is right. And entering that covenant with God is what every goy could do to that. Right, okay, so every goy could do this without actually going in front of a Beis Din. Okay, he can accept Torah in his heart. He's not halachically Israel, but he's identifying with the Erev Rav and the Hebrews on Mount Sinai. but he wants to convert. I mean, conversions didn't take this long, so it wasn't even a shaila. Like, what do you do with Gentiles who want to be Jewish and can't? It's because back then Jews would run to make somebody Jewish because it would increase their numbers or shrink their numbers, right? It's only nowadays that we're pushing people who are no different than us or potentially no different than us away when the vast majority of born Jews are dying to get out. Not that I'm pulling these sources off the top of my head. This is just common sense. It's not even a question. Like, it's not even a question.
Well, the question is, it's a chiddush. The Rambam says, because you have to look at the Rambam. The Rambam says about it says Goysha Shabbos Chayiv Misa and Goy the Lord Chayiv Misa.
Yeah, we discussed this before.
Yeah. So I mean, but basically, it's. If a person does it because they think, that their prophet said it or from another religion, that's not correct. Even in our own religion, by the way, it's the same thing. Rabbi Tarfon that he held like Beis Shammai. And it says kedai that you would have been killed. But why? Because the whole like Beis Shammai is making your own religion.
So, like, the Jewish people have given birth to a new entity. Okay, that has never really existed in the world. Someone who's not a goy and someone who's not a Jew. Okay, because back then, whoever wanted to be Israel became Israel. There's even a story in the Gemara of someone who converted amongst the nations. And Rabbi Akiva here holds that that person will be Chayav Misa, like for breaking Shabbos. Right? But never in Jewish history have the Jewish people held people who want to come in, held them out, kept them out. So now we ask the question, what do we do with all these people who are in some way sitting on the fence? Oh, well, we allow them to turn a light switch on Shabbos. We use them as Shabbos goyim. And it's a stupid question. These people want to be Jewish. We should encourage them to be Jewish and tell them the truth, that if God, in the 5 books Moses, really doesn't make a distinction between laws and who has to keep laws, he gives his laws stam, with the exception of the Vela, right? If you believe Torah is true, and he says in Parsha Re'eh to choose life, that means he's talking to you. It behooves you to do it. It behooves all of us. For the sake of this world, forget about a chelik and olam haba, right? I mean, it seems that our patriarchs did the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing, not for a reward, not for this and that, right? And that's ultimately why we should strive to do it. It seems like telling someone that they get a chelik and olam haba for keeping the Sheva Mitzvahs, but that they're chasidim ta'olam, like that's important. That's all midrashim. We don't know this for sure. I mean, I believe it. It sounds like nice.
The Rambam says it.
But it's a medrash. It's a medrash.
The Rambam is halacha. I mean,
No, wait. But the Rambam is not halacha. The Rambam is reiterating halacha. In other words, if it's a halachic principle brought down by Chazal, then we know that it's binding and obligatory. But if it's a metaphysical idea, the Rambam brings a lot of ideas like
the Rambam doesn't bring anything. No, by the way, if you look at Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, that's what he taught us. I mean, and we got to give him a big yasher koach for showing us what a great lamdan the Rambam is. The Rambam wrote it as a sefer of halacha, and everything he wrote is from a Gemara. He was a great lamdan, as you have to be when you're opposing halacha. You have to be a great lamdan.
No, so the Rambam said,
not everything is explicit. Not everything is.
So the Rambam said that someone shouldn't eat fruit. Right, in Hilchos Deos, I believe, he says people shouldn't eat fruit because it's unhealthy. And it appears like halacha 1 and the halacha 2. In Hilchos Ishus, he says that one shouldn't let his wife out of the house more than 2 times a month. And it appears like halacha 1, halacha 2. People have to, here's the problem with the Rambam. The problem is that he didn't source what he wrote. So sometimes you need a Kesef Mishnah, a Lechem Mishnah, a Magid Mishnah to see where these sources come from. So sometimes he does just reiterate midrashim. But that doesn't mean it's halacha. I mean, halacha tells you to do something.
What sneas is, the proper, modest way, but it all has to do with things were a little bit different than as far as sneas also. Like, that would be sneas in the situation that a woman maybe didn't have to go out, or she had the means, or
halacha has to do with what you do. The halacha lemaseh, like now what you believe. Which is why, like, Hilchos Tshuva is not really a halacha sefer. I mean, it's a sefer and Musar.
Why? You're obligated. It's a mitzvah to do tshuva.
For sure, it's a mitzvah to do tshuva. Right? Yeah, but in terms of the halachas,
what you're supposed to believe.
See, the problem with Mishnah Torah is that everything appears in the halacha 1, halacha 2, right? So you think it's the halacha, but there's statements in there that aren't halachas. So you have to know, like, what's the difference here? If it's like that, someone could say the same thing about Mishnah Berurah. Only because it appears in Mishnah Berurah, that means it's a halacha. No, like, I mean, people have to know that here, like, he's just bringing down a medrash. Here, like, he's actually bringing down the din. So how do we know the difference? When he tells you to do something, for example, in terms of a goy having a chelik olam haba for keeping the Shabbat mitzvahs, that actually appears as a medrash. Why? Because in the halacha, which is in Asur Rabbiah chapter 14, he tells you, what do you do when a goy comes to you to convert? What do you do? Right. Not what do you believe. So what do? He tells you that you tell the goy that only Israel has a chelik in olam haba. Only Israel. Whether he believes it or not, that's the halacha. So the halacha tells you to do something. Personal belief, it's just personal belief. He has opinions, I have opinions, you have opinions, right? We have to distinguish between opinions and halacha.
I have to look at that again. I don't know if he says that only Israel has a chelik in olam haba.
Look it up. The Shulchan Aruch reiterates it, and he's just quoting Yevamos. There's a lot of things like that in the Rambam. You can't believe only because the Rambam says it. It's halakha.
You have to understand what he means. Why does he say one place, not in one place?
So in Hilchos Malachim, the Rambam holds like Rav Shmuel in the Gemara. He says nothing in the world to come is going to change, with the exception that Israel will be able to learn Torah in peace. Nobody holds like that. Are you telling me that he brought that down as a halacha, or he was just quoting Rav Shmuel? Obviously, like anything having to do with Mashiach is not of a halachic nature. It's allegorical, right? It's nice to learn, but it's not halacha. I mean, halacha has to do with rulings. You see, Chazal, they vote things into existence, right? And Chazal don't vote metaphysical things into existence, because like if that was the case, like they would vote that our enemies should drown in the sea, or that Mashiach could come tomorrow, right? It's only things you do, not what you believe.
Well, but what you believe is halacha. There's hilchos deis. You're obligated to believe certain things.
That's a Musar sefer. It's not a halacha sefer. Even the for example,
it's halacha in the Torah. It's halacha in the Torah to believe certain things. That they're actually one of the part of the 613 mitzvahs.
There's a disagreement like that. I mean, the Rambam has a tshuva. He says that technically a Jew doesn't have to believe anything. Rabbi Yosef Abel disagrees. He brings on 3 things that a Jew has to believe, and like the Rambam brings on 13 things they have to believe. So they pretty much kind of all contradict each other, because we don't know, in terms of obviously believing in God and believing in the Torah mitzvahs, to say that there's a halacha in terms of what you have to believe in, that's rabbinic, that's problematic. Because the Rambam writes in Hilchos Sanhedrin.
That's what he says. He brings it. There's psukim. First of all, the pasuk explicitly says that you have to believe in God. It says you have to know God.
Right. That really seems like the bare minimum. But we're talking about rabbinic laws. So the Rambam in Hilchos Sanhedrin pretty much says that all the laws were voted.
Rabbinic. There's only 7 rabbinic laws. There's only 7 rabbinic laws.
Okay, wait, hold on, wait a minute. So that itself is a medrash, because there's a lot more than 7 rabbinic laws. The understanding is that there are 7 laws that we have a bracha for.
Positive rabbinic laws. So
there are 7 laws that we have a bracha for. And the Rambam responds differently to this. I mean, he says that how do we say in terms of lighting Hanukkah candles, I mean, God didn't command us to light Hanukkah candles. Hanukkah happened in the time of the Maccabees. So then he says, because God commands you to listen to the Beis Din Gadol, that by listening to them, you're listening to God. But it's not that it's a rabbinic mitzvah. It's just people think because there's a bracha attached to it that it has like the weight in some way of a Torah mitzvah. I mean, as you know, mitzvot and halachot are not necessarily the same thing. Well, halachot expand many times the mitzvahs. That's why the Rambam and Mishnah Torah always starts off with the mitzvah, and then he brings down the halachas that come out of the mitzvah.
Well, there's negative commandments, the negative prohibitions of the rabbis. There's a mitzvah to keep the second day of Yom Tov. Everybody.
It's not a mitzvah; it's a halacha. I mean, it's a halacha. And really, technically, the Rambam calls it a minhag. But there's some minhagim that...
It is a minhag. By the way, a lot of rabbinic things are called minhagim. And it's the question on what minhagim we do make a bracha and what we don't. Like even Hallel, there's different customs whether you make a bracha on Hallel, half of Hallel, because it's only a custom.
So Chazal say, minhag Yisrael Torachi. But this is not the minhagim that people just invent. Supposedly, these are minhagim that are sanctioned and approved by the Beis Din Gadol. In Hilchos Mamer, he brings down everything that the Beis Din Gadol is responsible for. And there he says, takanas, gezeras, and he says minhagot. That means that although something may have just crept into the Jewish people, it doesn't become binding on everyone until the authority says it's binding. Right? This whole thing, I mean, the word minhag nowadays is similar to like when the Christians use the word Holy Spirit, right? Because they try to push their argument saying, oh, well, the reason I do this is because the Holy Spirit told me. And the reason I do this as a Jew is because it's my minhag. It doesn't work like that. I mean, for it to be binding, it had to be established by the Beis Din Gadol. And then even the Rambam writes that if a minhag is established and it doesn't catch on amongst the Jewish people, we drop it.
Well, it's also, there's certain minhagim that it has to have some kind of basis for it. Sometimes some of the minhagim that, the people have it has a certain basis. Look, I agree with a lot what, what's his name, Rabbi David Bar Chaim says, that, the ideal is that every person should learn themselves, and we should eventually get out of this, like, Hungarian minhagim and Polish minhagim. Eventually, we should all be one again. That's the goal, And we should, look, I've done a lot of things, like people look at me like, I'm doing like the Rambam. Why, you just choose and pick? No, I don't choose and pick. Actually, I went through the sugya, and I decided that this fits with what I think is the proper way. So I follow the Rambam in a certain aspect, whatever. But,
there's a famous story, as you know, that I think it was Rabbi Eliezer who went to the Nazi Rabbi Yeshua, and then he's like, if I'm right, let the water flow backwards, right? So that's the whole story of Torah lo b'shmayim. So in that instance, Rabbi Yeshua doesn't tell him to change the way you think. He basically says, it doesn't really matter what you think. You have to do what we say. Okay, it's two different things. Thinking, i.e. believing things, is not something that rabbis could impose on people because that's not their authority. They vote things into existence. They voted, but you can't vote metaphysical things in existence. You can't vote that a goy has a chelik and olam haba for keeping the Sheva Mitzvahs. You can't vote that there may be a medrash that holds like that. Beis Shammai actually didn't believe in that because Rabbi Eliezer comes out in Masechet Sanhedrin and he says the opposite, and then Rabbi Yeshua attacks him. Rabbi Yeshua is, like Beis Hillel. It's a machloket in the Jewish people. And to say that it's a fact just because the Rambam brings it down, I mean, the Rambam also brings down that he don't have. Why? Because as a Talmud Chacham, he's bringing down both opinions. There's different opinions. But the Rambam is not.
It doesn't seem that he's bringing down an argument here. He would say that it's an argument. I would basically either one place he's saying one thing and the other place he's saying another thing. You have to see. I have to see it inside. Many times when I see it inside, I could figure out what why.
You can't just see it in the Rambam, but you have to compare it with where he's quoting it from. Okay, and anything allegorical. So you're telling me because the Rambam says that 6 laws were given to Adam and the 7th law was given to Noah, that this is obligatory to believe as a Jew? I mean, it's not obligatory, but a simple fact that the Gemara doesn't even decide on 7 laws. He's bringing out an opinion in a Tosefta.
Gemara does bring 7 laws. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, the whole thing with
I'm saying that it doesn't decide on 7. There's someone that says 7, someone else says 30. And
it talks about the Shiva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach.
In Masechet Avodah Zarah, where they ask, what's a ger to keep? Right. So there, someone says 30 laws. Someone says 7 laws. Someone else says all the Taryag mitzvahs with the exception of the Vela. In other words, the Rambam was bringing down his Masorah. In other words, the way he understood it. His people understood it. Not that it was 100%.
We bring up stock at the end. Look, the poskim, there are many opinions in the Gemara, and the poskim which we hold by. I mean, which one, either, but this is not our law.
We don't hold it because we don't have a Beis Din Gadol. I mean, the whole notion of Sheva Mitzvahs is that they're liable by the court for breaking any one of them. So being that there's no court, there's no din on this.
So to know what they're obligated to do. I mean, that's important.
Right. For sure it's important. I mean, I believe that Gentiles, if there was another court, would be liable for breaking 7 laws on threat of death with no pre-warning and only one judge. Okay, I believe that, but I don't believe that it's a fact that if someone keeps these laws, that they get a place in the world to come or they even please God. That is what the measure is.
The Rambam says it in one place,
Right, he believed it. I mean, he believed it elsewhere, like he said something else. But I believe.
Why shouldn't they get a portion of the world to come? Why are they any different than a Jew?
I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm just saying that to believe it you're holding an optional belief. Like, we don't know 100%. For sure, we don't know because it doesn't appear in Torah B'Ktav. But we're theorizing anything that comes from Chazal that's on a metaphysical notion, it's theory.
But first of all, you have to go with common sense. And I used to think that the song that Handel composed is Kfira. Like, not necessarily so, the things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it's not, but, my uncle used to say, on Sifrei Hasidus, but Rav Gedalia Shor, but it really means even in the Torah that you have to add two words, mit seichel. In other words, you have to use your common sense. If it doesn't fit your common sense, then you're probably misinterpreting it. In other words, it's not common sense that God has compassion on that God created people. And God is a sadist, and God, that God is going to put people in Gehenna and burning hell because things that they can't control, or if the guy is a good person and he's doing what he thinks is right, and he doesn't know much else.
All right.
So
not knowing, it doesn't just go for the gore, like it also goes for the Jew too.
That he's not going to get any reward. That he's going to burn in hell forever, and he's going to be lost.
Wait, hold on. So we're getting stuck on these preconceived notions. So these are developed ideas. The whole notion of Gehenna or even Olam Haba, as you know, doesn't appear in Torah B'Ktav. Now, I believe in it. Okay,
but
let's not.
That we can interpret it. It's
all right, but it's not literal. It's not literal. If we're talking about common sense, that we have to use the literal text. Now, it makes sense to me in a common way.
It's also common sense that it's not all about this world. I mean, we lived for 70 to 100 years. And
I don't know about that. I don't think like that statement. I think in Park Harvard that this world is just a corridor and it's the next world. And I think that's an unhealthy way to think. I mean, Chazal also mentioned that. It says that anyone who asks what's above, what's below, what's before, what's after, it's better that he wasn't born. They're split on the whole notion if it's okay to have melancholy in religion. But in terms of common sense, I think the common sense in the Torah is that if God gave a command and he says that if people break these commands, it's like a toeva, like an abomination to him, that he would in some way be upset at people who knew these commands exist, that they work, but chose to do less. I mean, it would make sense that he would be upset. Now, we're not talking about people who don't know. Clearly, God is a just God, right? And he's going to give people what they deserve. But to say that people who know that Torah is true, which is pretty much the people I reach out to, Gentiles who come from a Christian background, who have been identifying with that covenant in Torah for many, many years, that some rabbi should come around and say, you know what, do less. And being that God doesn't distinguish between ceremonial commands and ethical commands, that includes do less ethics, right? So that's...
God does. What do you mean? The ceremonial commands, it says that God gave us to the Jewish people only.
No, I'm saying that he doesn't distinguish between hukim and mishpatim. In terms of like the way we interpret it nowadays, where we think that a chok is something...
He was talking to the Jewish people, even to Mount Sinai, he was talking to the Jewish people.
Virtually everyone, all Chazal, who commented on this teaches that there were more Gentiles on Mount Sinai than Hebrews. In other words, that the Rav outnumbered everyone. And then they suddenly...
Yeah, but they came the Jewish people out of Egypt. I mean, so it doesn't matter if they came from...
Okay, so God... All right, so God wasn't talking to the Jewish people. God was talking to anyone who was willing to listen.
Because they converted already. They became Jewish already.
It doesn't say that. It seems, first, the whole notion of conversion is not clear in the 5 books of Moses, but it seems that everyone converted on Har Sinai. Okay, so till then, I mean, God was just speaking to everyone. He used Moshe Rabbeinu to speak to whoever who would listen.
Just because you have people there that converted already, they're no different than anybody else.
Yeah, but they didn't convert. Like, what could they have converted to? I mean, the Hebrews in Mitzrayim behaved like Egyptians did, right? I mean, they weren't anything special with the exception of Shevet Levi, maybe.
Why would you say that God spoke to anybody who wasn't there? God spoke to the people that were there.
Right, correct. But the vast majority of people that were there were in Hebrews.
He said Yisrael. No, they were Yisrael. They were Yisrael, just like a convert that converts, somebody who joins the Jewish people at any point.
In Mitzrayim, the term Israel or Hebrew had no religious significance to it. It was cultural. It was tribal. In other words, I believe in the whole notion of Zchut Avot. Clearly,
I'm not talking about Mitzrayim. When God says, "Be'ato Yisrael, Mo Hashem Elokecha whatever. It's talking about, it says Yisrael, Shema Yisrael.
Right. And the vast majority of people there are listening.
No, not God is speaking to Israel. And God is speaking to
Sinai.
Post-Sinai. Anybody else?
Post-Sinai, the title Israel took on a different meaning. Okay, when God says Israel, he means religiously Israel, right? I mean, clearly, as you know, it says in the Haggadah, where we tell the Hebrew child that if they were Mitzrayim, they wouldn't have been redeemed, right? So only because you happen to have a pedigree going all the way back to Yaakov doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a covenant with God. Every time God says Israel, post-Sinai, he means those in my covenant. And those not, he uses the word karet, they're lekaret, that I cut you off from my people. So this whole notion that he's only speaking to ethnic people, no, he's talking to people who believe.
So he's talking about the people, well, not ethnic. Israel has nothing to do with ethnic.
Okay. Yeah, so that's what you're saying nowadays. That if someone's halachically Jewish, that they're bound to keep this, in terms of the Beis Din Shalmala, like court in heaven. But if someone is not halachically Jewish, they're not bound. Now, in God's eyes, I believe they are bound. In terms of halacha, they're not bound.
But it says Yisrael.
Right, but Yisrael is not flesh and blood. It's not Basar Adam. It's a people in terms of like in Islam, where they say the Ummah. Right, the Ummah means the nation, but it's a nation made up of ethnicities.
I know, but that doesn't mean everybody.
It means anyone who's convinced and wants to enter.
No, that's not according to halacha. The halacha is that you're not a Yisrael unless you convert.
But the halacha doesn't deal with metaphysical issues. It means that you're not a Yisrael in terms of being liable for the punishments of the Sanhedrin unless you convert.
Because that's what they're Yisrael. Saying. When the Torah is referring to Yisrael, either your mother's Jewish or you converted. One of the two.
So it wasn't conversion. Wait, hold on. So conversion as we have it nowadays.
First of all, on Mount Sinai, God spoke to the people that were there. That's it. Nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else.
And he called them Israel, even though it was mostly Gentiles.
No, it wasn't mostly Gentiles. They were all Israel.
They became Israel because they were heir of God. It says.
By the way, we all converted to Mount Sinai. Therefore, whoever converted to Mount Sinai was Israel.
It says the Hebrews left Egypt.
They left Egypt. By the way, nobody else was included in that. God was speaking to only the people there.
Right, okay.
Now you're talking about...
I'm not denying that. But it says that they left Egypt with a mixed multitude. That means they left with a mixed multitude, not that they left with only Jews, because they converted in Egypt.
They were standing in Mount Sinai. They were standing in Mount Sinai. Anybody who was standing in Mount Sinai was Jewish.
Right, and everyone nowadays could metaphorically in some way also stand on Mount Sinai and accept the mitzvahs just like they did. I mean, they could also say Nativ and Ishma in their own way. In other words, once someone has come to that realization that... What?
Where do you come to that? Why?
Because if they did
God
we can do
only
it.
spoke to the Jewish people. They
he
did
spoke
it
to the mixed multitude as well. He also spoke to the mixed multitude.
No, he didn't. They converted.
When did they convert?
First of all, the mixed multitude. The mixed multitude was Jewish just like anybody else was Jewish. They were all Jewish.
Because they accept the Torah.
And the other people were Jewish because they accepted the Torah too.
Correct. And people could be Jewish in God's eyes nowadays by accepting the Torah as well.
Guess what? They were all the same in Mount Sinai. Everybody in Mount Sinai was the same.
And there was no Beis Din Gadol back then deciding who was what, and that was later on. I understand that God gave the authority to this court.
These people, God spoke only to the people that stood at Mount Sinai and their descendants.
Right, and all those people basically had the status of heathens till they accepted Torah.
Right. So those who did not stand at Mount Sinai, other Gentiles who did not stand at Mount Sinai, were not descended from those, are not Jewish. God did not speak to them.
Oh, wait. I mean, God speaks to people daily. I mean, the mountain is really insignificant here when someone comes to God. I mean, whether someone converts, or a born Jew decides to remain Jewish. I think anyone, whether
people, God spoke to only those that were there, and the others were excluded.
It also says, I'm making the covenant with those who are standing here and those who are not standing here. I'm just saying in terms of it being limited to that mountain.
First of all, it doesn't say that. That's it says those who are not standing here is referring to their children.
It doesn't say that. I mean, it doesn't explain that who it's talking about.
No, but we all know that that's what it means.
But that doesn't really make sense. Wait, hold on. But the notion that someone could be born into a relationship with God, I don't think appears in the Torah like that.
God never spoke to anybody but the Jewish people. Never included anyone else.
So you're saying that God never spoke to anyone who didn't identify as a Jewish people, correct?
No, nothing to do with it. If you do not descend from those that stood on Mount Sinai, you're excluded from the Torah.
Oh, I disagree. I mean, I think Mount Sinai is available right now for anyone.
It does. But it doesn't. But, you could convert. You could join the Jewish people.
Conversion didn't really exist as an organized system back then. I mean, back then.
Well, everything, all the halachas of conversion, they did at that time. They went to the mikvah and they had a bris milah and they accepted the Torah. Those three things, and they brought a carbon.
It doesn't say, wait, hold on. All right, so outside of Milah, right, I mean, Tevila and Korban are not explicit in the Torah. I mean, the Rambam in some way ties in with Tevila in terms of washing their clothes.
It is explicit. We learn it out from the Psukim there. It says that they should wash themselves. It says.
No, the Rambam says that they wash their clothes. That's not explicit that Korban, Milah, and Tevila are from the Torah. All right,
we learn it like everything else. We learn it out from Sukkah like anything we do. Every halacha we learn it from Sukkah.
All right, so we don't learn things like that. I mean, Chazal decided with the 13 principles of exegesis. They'll go and say, okay, this is what we're going to do because.
By the way, everything is learned out from the 13 principles. And by the way, it says that the Torah's this whole thing about tchelas that we don't have a Masorah. I'm just diverting for a second. Because everything that so many halachas that we have, we forgot. It says, Sof Torah shenishtachach mi Yisrael, that the Torah is going to be forgotten from Yisrael, because it says in Tanakh that and it says in the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai learned many halachas out that were forgotten because the Talmidim of Rebbe Kiva all died and they forgot the Torah.
That's the measures.
He brought back.
And it's also measures that Moshe Rabbeinu fought.
The rabbis died. It was pretty obvious. We mourned them because the Torah was forgotten. So many times the Torah was forgotten over so many years, and we darshaned it from Sukkim. God gave us the tools to.
I mean, there's another measure that says that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot thousands of halachas. That's also a measure. I'm saying, don't take these midrashim seriously. In other words, things that are optional to believe doesn't make sense to me. I mean, things that are optional to believe aren't meant making sense of.
We forgot things. We have the tools to learn out from the Torah. We have the psukim, everything.
Hold on one second. Yeah, but where do we disagree? I don't think we're disagreeing here. I mean, we're just sort of splitting hairs. This is more like
all I'm saying. Well, we're disagreeing in the fact that the Torah was given to the Goyim also. I mean, it was in certain ways. First of all,
that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the Torah is given to Goyim. I never said that. I'm saying the Torah is given to anyone who wants to accept the Torah. And that's even for people who are born Jewish as well. Only because you're born Jewish, you're Larry David or Woody Allen, and you don't care about God, you yourself have to come to a point in your life where you also say Nasiv and Ishma. You take the Torah upon yourself, just like you were standing on Har Sinai. You
intrinsically have the obligation. You just don't, since you don't know any better. So
I don't believe in that. I don't believe in intrinsic obligations. You know why? It's because Jews always make fun of Christians, saying that JC could in some way vicariously do something for them, and they laugh at them. Saying, you can merit off of his sacrifice. What you're saying is that Jews can merit out of the decisions and sacrifices that their parents did for them, right? Both of them are illogical. I mean, everyone's responsible for themselves, and everyone should try and strive to do the right thing. And Torah mitzvahs is the right thing. That's it.
Look, that Hashem chose the Jewish people, I mean, that it says in the Torah.
All right, so the Jewish people, like you said, it wasn't Bas V'Dam. It's a philosophy that people are buying into.
That we have a schus of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, I mean, that it says in the Torah too.
All right, so if that's the case, then Amalek also has a schus, because Amalek ultimately comes from Yitzchak, right?
By the way, you're not totally wrong there.
Enter Kabbalah. Fine. No, the reason that Amalek and Edom...
By the way, Yitzchak did like Esav, right? There must have been a reason.
I mean, the Torah doesn't say, like, I don't speculate, but the reason why Amalek or Edom don't have a chelik or don't have zchut avot is because they didn't keep the Torah. That's the thing. It all has to do with wanting to keep the Torah. It has nothing to do with flesh and blood. That's my point.
You may not like Chassidus, but a lot of it makes sense. Yitzchak liked Esav.
There's some things in the Chassidus that make sense. Some things in the Quran that make sense too. I mean, that doesn't mean I'm going to call myself a Muslim.
Yitzchak, but it says it. Yitzchak liked Esav. He loved Esav. But Yitzchak have his...
Sure. Okay, fine. I mean, really, according to the Peshat...
Yitzchak was no dummy. Yitzchak was no dummy.
Esav wasn't a bad guy necessarily according to the Peshat, right? It's the Midrashim that really make him into a bad guy. He just seems sort of like a little uninformed.
Also, look, he has descendants that Yitzchak obviously had Ruach HaKodesh in the Nevuah. I mean, Rebbe Kiva came out of Esav. So what's wrong with it? So it makes
Rebbe Kiva came out of Amalek. Fine.
Yeah.
So Yichus doesn't play a big role in
what I'm saying is that Amalek, it's a good reason to like Amalek.
Oh,
if you say
there you go.
It was a good
we'll end on that.
But Yitzchak loved Amalek, right? Yitzchak liked Esav. And it's a good reason to like Esav because of Rebbe Kiva.
All right. I mean, it may be a magic social that Rabbi Kiva was descendant of Esav. We said anyone from Bnei Brak had blood from Amalek.
Okay, I know you don't like Hasidus and things like that, but you have to. But so much of it brings out the pshat. I mean, the Isbris brings out. I mean, he shows the similarities of Rebbe Kiva and Esav.
Oh, I'm not against that. I'm not against Hasidus. I'm against people believing that it's obligatory to believe. That's it. I mean, it could be a nice story.
But look at he brings it. It's beautiful. His sefer. I mean, the Mesa
It could be beautiful and still optional to believe. You know, we can't get stuck on what's called first stage thinking.
But if you use your seichel to discern what's correct and what's not correct, I'm not or how much takes
on a personal level. I agree, on a personal level, but not on a national level. And that's what rabbis are doing nowadays. They're deciding for you what should be special and what shouldn't be.
But here's the thing. I mean, Esav is very... Esav had a certain thing. We see what Esav's thing was. He wanted more. He wanted, he says, I'm going to die. I need this red soup. I need more. And it says he wanted more and more and more, but he didn't apply it maybe in the right aspects in that time. But Rebbe Kiva was like that too. I mean, if you bring the medrash, it's so beautiful, the medrash about Rebbe Kiva and how much greater he was, and it's true. How much greater he was than Moshe Rabbeinu. Maybe.
All right, come on. Maybe. Ezra also. Okay.
He might have been a greater London. What are you talking about? Moshe didn't understand. It's very possible.
Okay, wait, hold on. This is the problem. Like in halacha, we have the whole notion of a sveka and a shvut. That once you start building too much on a rabbinic law, it sort of abolishes itself. Once you start building too much on midrashim, it really should wash itself out. I mean, it seems like you're building on midrashim, and before you know it, you're going to have a different religion.
That was a religion. The bottom line is, Rebbe Kiva could have been a much greater London than Moshe Rabbeinu.
All right, fine.
Just because Moshe, he accepted the whole Torah from God. But I mean, the fact is that a lot of Gerim is the same thing. Yitzchak loved this about Esav, that he wasn't satisfied. I mean, you see that in the pasuk. My brother Yeshli Rav. I have a lot, but he wasn't satisfied. He never said I have it all. He wanted more, and he wanted to, sometimes people have a great appetite for physical things, but it really, they put it to physical things, but there are two types of people in the world. There are people that are not satisfied with what they have, and there are people that are satisfied with whatever they have. And it's in a lot of ways, it's a very big down to be satisfied with what you have. It's a type of thing that if you're a guy, you'll be satisfied with the 7 commandments. And then
I doubt it. I doubt it. I think hired like of Gentiles. What?
Some people's laziness. Some people laziness is they're satisfied with whatever they have spiritually and satisfied with what they have.
So like if that's the case, then Israel has more of that taiva, being that the vast majority of Jews are irreligious and the vast majority of Gentiles identify with the religion. So it seems that maybe we're calling the wrong people Israel. You say, I'm not against your Hiddish, but
It's
someone
like
doesn't
that.
know.
The pasuk says, to the Jewish people, he says, look how religious the Gentiles are in their religion. And he says, why can't you be like that with God, Because they have a Yetzer Hara, because they're doing the wrong thing. It's always, the Yetzer Hara always wins out, they're serving the wrong God. So why? They're serving the wrong God.
You believe that Jews are intrinsically superior to a Gentile. In other words, that even though they're doing bad, they're doing good. In other words, the reason they're doing bad is because they're so good.
Like that. They say that Yisrael are listen, we make a bracha shelo on a goy, right?
Wait, hold on. That's a rabbinic bracha. Safek Rabban al-Hakel. And there's a lot of things the rabbis brought down that I'm not happy with. I mean, I say it because as of Lo Fasor. All right, anyways, to be continued.
Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay, be well.
All right, have a good one. Thank you.